Hey, what is up? My name is Rubidium. Today we are breaking down a little independent film called Avengers: Infinity War. So I'm still playing around with the format of these breakdowns. I sort of felt like the last couple were a little bit sedentary, just sort of me sitting at the computer talking. It gets boring after a while. So I'm going to change it up a little bit, do this one to camera and cut in the footage that I'm talking about it, make it a little bit more active, see if that makes it a little bit more entertaining for you guys and more engaging for me to actually record. So this was a big movie, possibly the biggest movie ever. They shot Infinity War and its sequel, which still isn't titled, back to back over about 12 months. That is a really long production, but you know, this movie had so many stars and so many set pieces and needed so many people to be in it. It was the culmination of 10 years and 19 movies from Marvel. So they wanted to be the biggest thing ever, and oh my god, this thing is big. You can see in this first still I have here that they used a codename, Mary Lou 1, on the slate. I'm guessing that the sequel is Mary Lou 2. This is reminiscent of Empire Strikes Back, which was codenamed Blue Harvest, I believe. It didn't attract a distracting amount of attention and paparazzi and all that sort of thing. This thing on the ground is interesting. It's sort of like a flame bar that you're pumping natural gas through so that you can have a burning effect. I'm not sure if they're using it as part of the set or they're using it to create a heat haze to shoot through. This gets done quite a lot, actually, most famously in Raging Bull, where they had a tray of hot coals that sat right in front of the camera lens and sent up heat in order to distort the image and make the atmosphere of the boxing match more intense. Next thing I want to talk about is the stages that they shot some of these fight scenes on. Floor-to-ceiling green screen with tracking markers, which isn't much of a surprise, but the whole ceiling seems to be made up of DMX-controlled space lights, maybe some kind of sky panel. It looks like they're tungsten in these shots, but they can probably switch them over to daylight as well. Adding to that, it looks like they have a corner of more intense back and side lights that they can turn on depending on what the shot is. But those are also diffused as well, so they don't get too harsh and throw too harsh a shadow. You know, and onto that sort of baseline, they then bring in their key lights with the set itself acting as the rim light and as the fill. Doing it this way, you have a huge amount of control over a really large area, and you're also illuminating your green screen for shooting with visual effects composites. I also found a couple of shots where they're using blue screen instead of green screen. I'm guessing that's because Gamora, who's a central character in this movie, is green. So shooting her against a green screen is going to create troubles because she's going to key out. So this film was directed by the Russo brothers, who are a legitimate creative team, according to the DGA. If you're not aware, the DGA is the guild or union that governs directors in Hollywood, and one of their largest and most important jobs is protecting the authority and influence of the director. If you want to have multiple directors on a DGA film, you need to apply beforehand and have them assess your work and see if you're actually a legitimate creative team. This is to stop Tom Cruise being the director of every movie he's in, or other Hollywood superstars eroding the authority of the director by putting themselves onto that credit. So, you know, the DGA has obviously looked at the Russos' body of work and granted them permission to be duly credited directors. The Wachowski siblings also did this, as did the guys who directed Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. I believe in that case, one handles the talent and the other one takes control over the camera. So essentially they're duplicating themselves. It looks like in the BTS of Infinity War that the Russo brothers really stay close together. You know, every time you see them on monitors, they're both there. It's not as though one's directing another unit or one is doing something else. There is probably advantage to two people collectively taking on such a big project. So last we looked at Blade Runner 2049, and I noticed, I talked about how the previs was animated. In this one, the previs was live action, and not only that, they actually added visual effects to the previs, which I've never seen done before. They essentially made this movie already, probably not all of it, but the fight scenes and things like that to block out what they were going to have to do and what the effects would look like when they finished. Previs for this film, I imagine, cost more than most films, in the millions of dollars. But it meant that before they started shooting, they already knew what shots they needed and how the story would work. Something else I found really interesting on how this movie was shot was that some characters were fully CGI, Thanos, for instance, and you see poor Josh Brolin wearing his motion capture suit and his performance capture headwear, but then also having to wear this crazy stilt kind of sandwich board with Thanos' head above him so that his fellow actors know what the eyeline looks like. That must have felt ridiculous, but he delivered a great performance nonetheless. Other characters were in full makeup, and some were in a hybrid of them. You see here Robert Downey Jr. is wearing the Iron Man upper body, but just has sweatpants on his lower body. Whereas Peter Parker's Spider-Man has a full motion capture suit, but they're using his real face and expressions. The last thing I wanted to note is that the sort of philosophical underpinnings of this movie were particularly weak. I believe in the comics, Thanos wants to kill half the universe as a gift to his love, death. But in this movie, he wants to do it as some kind of Malthusian economic idea where he's going to erase half the universe and the other half is going to live in paradise. It doesn't take a degree in economics to know that within a generation or two after you've eradicated half the universe, if you don't totally collapse the economies of all the planets involved, people just have more kids and you'll have exactly as many people as you did before. Dumb enough to have annoyed me while I was watching it. But I do know where they were going with it, which was, Thanos is prepared to make any sacrifice to do the right thing, and the Avengers aren't prepared to make any sacrifice to do the right thing. It's sort of a battle of ideas, even if those ideas are kind of dumb. But if the money ends up in actors' pockets or it ends up in contract negotiations or the rights to the story, you don't see that $100 million on the screen. This film, you definitely saw it. And Marvel and Disney have got really good at not only outspending everyone else out there, but at getting that money onto the screen in a way that's absolutely spectacular, because they're the best at monetizing that intellectual property. They sell toys, they sell Happy Meals, they sell amusement parks. So no one else except Disney can spend this kind of money right now, and no one else apart from Disney can make that money back. So we'll be very interested to see, I think it's May of next year, the sequel. Still no trailer. We might get one around Christmas, but fingers crossed it will live up to the hype and the tragedy of this one.